In the small town of Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of a dense forest, there was a sense of safety. Everyone knew each other, and the biggest news was often about Mrs. Clarkson's cat getting stuck in a tree again. But as summer waned and the days grew shorter, an unseen presence began to stir in the town. Emily Parker was a quiet, unassuming woman who lived alone in a quaint cottage on the outskirts of Willow Creek. She worked as a librarian and spent her evenings reading or tending to her garden. Her life was predictable and serene until she started noticing strange things. It began with small, almost imperceptible occurrences: a feeling of being watched, shadows that seemed to flicker in her peripheral vision, and the faint sound of footsteps following her home from work. Emily brushed these off as figments of her imagination, until one night she found a single black rose on her doorstep. There was no note, no sign of who had left it. Unease crept into her mind, but she convinced herself it was a harmless prank. As the days passed, the incidents escalated. She found more roses, always black, placed in different spots around her home. Once she discovered a rose on her bedside table, even though she was certain she had locked all her doors and windows. She changed the locks and installed an alarm system, but it didn't help. The roses kept appearing. One evening, as Emily was closing the library, she felt the now familiar sensation of being watched. She looked around, but saw no one. Hastily, she gathered her things and headed home. The sun had set, and the forest loomed dark and foreboding around her. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace. She could hear the leaves crunching behind her, but when she turned there was nothing. Reaching her cottage, she locked the door behind her and tried to calm her nerves. She decided to make some tea to soothe herself. As she filled the kettle, a soft whisper echoed through the room. "Emily." She froze, her blood running cold. Slowly she turned around, but the kitchen was empty. The whisper came again, closer this time, "Emily." Panic set in. She grabbed her phone to call the police, but the line was dead. In desperation, she ran to her bedroom to grab her car keys and flee. On her bed lay a single black rose, and a note that read, "You can't escape me." Her hands trembled as she backed away, bumping into the dresser. The whisper came once more, "Emily, I'm here." Tears streamed down her face as she ran to the front door. Fumbling with the lock, she finally managed to open it and burst out into the night. She sprinted to her car, only to find all 4 tires slashed. Defeated and terrified, she turned to run to her neighbor's house, but the shadows seemed to close in around her. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and cloaked in black. His face was obscured, but she could feel his eyes on her. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, her voice breaking. The figure stepped closer, and the whisper came again, now right in her ear. "Because you belong to me." Emily screamed and ran into the forest, branches scratching at her skin as she pushed through the underbrush. She didn't stop until she reached the old, abandoned cabin in the heart of the woods. She hid inside, her breath coming in ragged gasps, praying he wouldn't find her. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sounds of the forest. Just as she began to think she was safe, she heard the whisper once more, "Emily." It was inside the cabin now. She backed into a corner, clutching a broken piece of wood as her only weapon. The door creaked open, and the figure stood in the doorway. The moonlight cast a ghostly glow, illuminating his face. It was familiar, yet twisted with malice. "Please, leave me alone," she begged. The figure smiled, a chilling sight. "You can't hide from me, Emily. I will always find you." He stepped closer, and she swung the piece of wood wildly. He caught her wrist with inhuman strength and pulled her close. The last thing she saw was his cold, dead eyes before everything went black. The next morning, the townspeople found Emily's cottage empty, the front door wide open. They searched the forest and found the abandoned cabin, but there was no sign of her. All they discovered was a single black rose lying on the cabin floor. Emily Parker was never seen again, but sometimes, late at night, the whispering can still be heard, echoing through the trees. "Emily,